from an IR perspective, what have you seen fail? Like going through a process? Was it per people? Is it process? Is it the company? Is it the culture? What have you seen fail?
There's a couple of things that I'll go to on this. One of them is not having a good relationship with your C-suite, your executive suite, and in particular, legal department. Having a very close working relationship with all of them is a great thing. Also, whenever you're working with them on a daily basis or however frequent, it's really ensuring that you're helping them understand what you're doing on a daily basis or what you're doing to help secure the organization. You have that story put together in their speak, their business language. That way they understand how you're adding value to the organization, how you're helping drive down risk and reduce risks across the organization and across everything that we're doing. So that way the company can keep producing the widgets and taking in the money for it.
Welcome to the State of Security Podcast. I'm Jeff Hancock, your host. Today, we're going to be talking about incident response, in particular, in a couple of different areas. One, practical application of incident response, some of the documents that the government's just released, in particular, NIST and DHS, some broad discussion there, but then really diving into the specifics of practical application, right? So on our show today, two guests, Brian Weidner. Brian is currently the CISO for A.O. Smith Corporation. He's been a CISO for two other organizations, including a large company we might all buy cars from called Nissan. Prior to that, Brian has been pretty steeped in incident response and threat intelligence over the years. So thank you, Brian, for being on the call today.
Thank you, Jeff, for inviting me. Appreciate it.
And the second person we have is Chris Skinner. Chris comes to us after 23 years in the Marine Corps. He was an operations officer in the National Marine Corps Cyber Command, as well as several tours of duty, if you will, at NSA, most recently being the Future Operations Planner. Currently, Chris is our Incident Response Manager and lead at Access Point Technology. Chris, thanks for joining today.
Happy to be here. Thanks, Jeff.
Cool. So, again, as we've talked even in our prep call, right, the idea here is really practical application of incident response. And with some of the changes with DHS's potential requiring critical infrastructure organizations, some new reporting requirements, which is going to be a challenge, I think. But then also NIST releasing a second document just recently on how the most recent incident response planning and response guides have been developed, particularly around the new NIST CSF and what that looks like. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But before we dive into all that, well, I'd like you guys to give a bit of a description on your career and how you came to be where you are, quite frankly. Both of you bring a different perspective to the role for sure. I think it'd be really good for us to learn what that is and what that looks like. So, Brian, if you wouldn't mind going first, how did you get to where you are today?
Sure. Great question. I kind of wonder that myself too at times, but really it started a long time ago before security was really a thing as a network manager and got wrapped into an incident early on with an organization I was working at, a three-letter agency, knocked on the door, had some questions for us, worked with them, and they hooked me up with a cybersecurity consulting firm, which was, again, kind of a newer field that was coming out, worked in that for about a decade, did anything from PCI assessments, general assessments, to lots of incident response. Then from that, spun out and because I got to see a number of organizations, went to a couple of different organizations. One you already mentioned with Nissan, helped build a team there and a program there over time, and then moved on to a new challenge over at A.O. Smith with it's an amazing organization. I've got an amazing team, and we've got a great future ahead of us, and I can't wait to see what we deliver for the organization.
Chris?
So Jeff, like you said, 23 years in the Marine Corps. And what got me here was kind of standing on the shoulders of giants. Let's just be awesome. Be honest here. Worked with a lot of good people, but I started my career as an electronics maintainer, as an enlisted guy, went through the commissioning program, was a communications officer, got a good foundation in information systems engineering, and then finished off as a cyberspace warfare officer there at Fort Meade, working for Marine Forces Cyberspace Command, the service cyber component for the Marine Corps. And I did cyberspace operations in the full spectrum there. But I really enjoyed my time as a current operations officer there. I was a crisis action team lead for a number of different incidents while at Marpor Cyber. And that's kind of where I got my niche. How I ended here today, again, standing on the shoulders of giants, a Marine that worked for me, who is now on the threat intel team, sent me a text and said they were looking for an IR guy, and the rest is history. And so I'm here. So through a network of people that I work for and with, landed me to where I am today.
Cool. What's funny about security is there's so much of a different, people coming from so many different perspectives. And it's kind of a funny misnomer when I talk to people and they're like, well, cybersecurity is people who've got engineering degrees or no degrees, and they've just been in a closet with a laptop for the last 20 years or 10 years or 5 years. But gosh, that's so different. We talk to people. I mean, you guys bring such a diverse background to everybody you work with, your customers, your peers, your staff. I mean, that's phenomenally untapped. I mean, quite frankly. So
it's interesting how people come from all different walks of life. On my teams, I've had folks that have been musicians, artists that are some of the best reversers of malware, architects, engineers, you name it, IR folks. It's just coming from all kinds of different areas and being able to ask all those different questions, why, and get down to that root cause is really what it comes down to. But
it's funny that, the Marines and cybersecurity may not necessarily go, like people might not think they go together. But I mean, your career, Chris, and what you've done and where you're plugged in at and the groups you work for, I mean, that's definitely in the middle of the fight. So interesting backgrounds for sure. Just to kick this off, I'm going to read this description we've got here on an incident, and then I want to talk to you guys about your most challenging incidents you've managed or been a part of. So from a cybersecurity perspective, an incident is really an occurrence that actually or eminently jeopardizes without lawful authority the integrity, confidentiality, or availability of information or an information system. Really some kind of activity or behavior that's malicious, that's potentially malicious. I shouldn't say it's always not the rule of thumb there, but someone accessing a network, either their security procedures are violated, policies are violated, or acceptable use policies have been adjusted. What do you guys think? One, of the definition, and two, and that's a definition that I got from NIST. I wanted to go with that one versus some of the more colloquial, let's say, descriptions of incidents that I've been privy to over the years. What do you guys think about that? What do you guys think about, how have your most challenging incidents, what have they been, and what's been your role?
If I could say something, I like the definition. It says imminently jeopardizes, or I would add potentially jeopardizes. For me, my incident response portfolio isn't big, but we had, from a service cyber component, we responded to the SolarWinds incident, right? Like everybody knew about that. There wasn't we didn't have an imminent jeopardizing event that took place on the network, but there was a potential if we didn't respond in kind and let our commander make a risk decision on should we leave that software on the network while SolarWinds kind of sorts it out and we just observe, or we take the risk where there's a lot of garrison and deployed expeditionary networks that were using some of those modules currently while that was going on. So, from an incident response, we had to be proactive, providing the boss with information, understanding the boss's risk tolerance. Our guy was extremely risk averse. So he was immediately leaning towards, take it all off the network or isolate wherever it is, which is smart. But again, we had to factor in the idea that there were people operating, in theater, in garrison, the modules and the tools were actively being used. Ultimately, he made the decision to isolate it and take it all off the network. And then everyone just had to clean up after the fact. But, that challenge from a global perspective, informing everyone that needs to know, getting everybody in a room, albeit virtually or whatever. And then the information flow was the hardest part about the incident response process from our perspective. Because we have our cybersecurity service provider, which is basically a network administration piece of the network. And then we sat over the top of the higher headquarters and managed the crisis action team and the OPT that kind of managed the crisis. But again, it didn't have an effect, but the potential for the immediate jeopardy for the network was something we were concerned with. Over to you.
Yeah, so any definition in our field is going to rapidly evolve, just like the entire profession that we're in. I mean, I look back even a year ago and things are different than what they are, just a couple of days ago. Every day is a brand new day, which our field's rapidly evolving. The threats are rapidly evolving. It's always that cat and mouse game how do we keep up? How do we find that? We have to be right 100% of the time. The threat actors only have to be right 1% of the time to get in and potentially cause damage. And really, for me, one of the most challenging incidents that I dealt with and worked through was a global incident at a major organization. The problem is the threat actors had been in for well over a year. There was logging only back to a year, and it showed that they had been in going around. They basically owned the entire environment. Active Directory was totally compromised. You name it, it was owned.
And not to be named organization.
Yeah, I'm not going to name any names. But like I said, it was an interesting endeavor and what was actually the most difficult part of it was, the threat actors were difficult themselves, because as we were figuring out and understanding what they were doing, figuring out their techniques, their tactics, where they're at, they were constantly shifting and evolving. But besides that, actually, the most difficult part was wrapping everyone together and making sure everyone was aligned in everything that we were doing. Because again, this being global, we broke it up into 3 regions across the globe, and just performing some of the containment measures and countermeasures that we put in, we had to time it very, very, very specifically across the globe. And one of the problems that we had with the first set was one group jumped ahead of the other, and that just blew the whole plan. And the threat actors actually picked it up and were able to rapidly transfer what they were doing, figure out a new path, and then we had to go back, restructure our plan. Then we kicked it off using different mechanisms. Let's just say a lot of project management got involved, which was amazing and helped out, but then really allowed us to then contain the incident and then further eradicate them from the environment, and then really hope that everything was wrapped from there. So, because you never know, that's why we always look every day.
Yeah. How'd that turn out in the end?
So it was about total time from beginning to end was about a year of my life for the entire incident. Again, wrapping them through, putting the containment in place, all the remediation aspects, components. And then at the end of the day, the request was, hey, you helped us do all this. Now, can you develop out a plan for us to have a real cyber program? So develop that out, kick that off, and then ended up working back at the organization. So to do that during my consulting days.
Yeah. That's quite a long incident response cycle, right? A year.
It was, but they were deep
that's crazy
in the environment, and they were also deep into not only the environment for our organization, but then also our partner and sister organizations too, which added complexities.
It's interesting that you said it's a year, right? Like, there's no timeline on these things. Sometimes the appetite for information and, the whoever the network owner or the business owner is like, we got to get back. But sometimes you just don't get back that quick. Hopefully you have some rollbacks or some backups to go to, but business can be disrupted for a significant period of time. All of that with the appetite of getting back into business. I said, that's an interesting point, because we never dealt with anything that long, but right prior to I got to my incident response job in the military, they dealt with a 6-month incident there. That was an enduring effort that took a long time after remediation to validate the system that they wanted to bring back on. And it was disrupted for 3 years, even post-incident. So it's interesting that you say that, Brian.
Yeah, and that was one of the hard parts, is we had to keep everything running. We had to keep the business running. We had to continue to take payments, but we had to make sure all those payments were safe and everything was wrapped around there. So it was these pockets of this organization that we were hyper-focused on. While we knew they were over in XYZ space, if we could keep them over there at bay, this group can continue to run. We did it with, actually, there was only about 24 hours worth of total business disruption for the entire incident, because where we had to finally just shut off the internet connection at one point in time, roll a containment, then turn it back on in 24 hours. But that way, production could continue, sales orders can continue to come in, financing payments can continue to come in, loans can continue to be written, but again, all in a very, very safe manner. And it was, again, that's why part of the reason why it took so long to architect this containment. That's why, like I said, it was keeping all the cats herded, because the first time we tried and the one group went first, it just blew everything, and we had to start over from scratch, re-architecting this. And then it was, okay, you go here, you go here. At this point in time, you go here. This person will let you know when they're ready to go. And like I said, it was a couple of days of no sleep. But then it was a lot of excitement whenever we got it. And like I said, we validated no more connections, nothing else. So it was that sheer point of enjoyment. Then a bunch of us kind of passed out. I'll put it that way.
I bet. So at what point did you involve law enforcement, Brian, and what was that experience? And then Chris, on the national security defense side, I mean, obviously you don't necessarily need to involve law enforcement depending on boundaries and, national security issues, but I'd be curious from both of your perspectives. When did you, Brian? And if you did, and then, or what would you be your recommendation of doing that, right? What's the value proposition? Same question for you, Chris.
Yeah, sure. So we did involve the FBI in this incident, and they had actually received a tip-off from somewhere else inside the government. Don't know where exactly, but we got involved with them. And what was actually nice is they were able to provide us information that we would never have been able to provide ourselves or get ourselves. They had a lot of deep-rooted intelligence. They were able to get an idea of who the specific actors were, and they were also able to then give us some of their techniques that they've seen in the past. We were able to work with them then in a number of areas as to some of the commands were not in English, so they were able to provide translators to help us understand what some of these commands were doing. And then there was a bulk of data that was encrypted, and it was intellectual property that was encrypted. They had some insight as to what the encryption string was. It was actually a book that they were very familiar with, and was able to start getting us down to a specific passage of the book that was used to figure out what the data actually was, because basically they used a little more than a paragraph's worth of information to encrypt as the encryption string. So,
wow,
it was very, like I said, very beneficial, very easy to work with them, which is one of the positive sides that we had. What was also great is then it also allowed us to use them during the discussions with the executive team. And in organizations, you can't really be a prophet in your own land, bringing in that third party, even if they're saying the exact same thing as you. It doesn't matter. They're hearing it from this unbiased group, and then it just adds more credibility to you and your statements and everything that you're doing. That's really where they were great at helping us with.
Yeah, just that same thing, Brian. Like, FBI, three-letter agencies, when you have that cross-functional team that comes together with a common goal in mind, whatever the target is, whether it's defense, whether it's incident response, whatever the case may be, once you have that cross-functional team and everybody's on the same path, it's lights out for efficiency. The intel apparatus opens up so much wider for your effort as well. So 100% agree. Don't have much more to add other than that, I've had a number of opportunities and not directly, but indirectly, witness that cross-functional team work well to achieve common goals. So
in our previous conversations and a document I sent you guys before our call here, one of the interesting things that DHS is doing, currently it's publicly available information right now, they're asking for public feedback, it's a Cyber Incident Reporting Act that they have authored that's going to go before Congress here this summer, they being DHS. And the issue is they're going to require companies to report any incidents within 72 hours, as well as report on any payments of ransomware within 24 hours across all the organizations. What was it called? The entities and businesses and owners and operators of entities and businesses within the critical infrastructure sectors, all 16 of them. And it's going to, potentially be a requirement for organizations to follow that process. And the thought behind that is CISA at DHS wants to be able to be alerted and be made aware of any issues and challenges and problems immediately, so that they can help support or respond or react to any of the incidences that occur in the critical infrastructure sector. I think that's of good intent, right? But I don't know, how would you guys what do you think about that, right? How do you think the organization should work with the government as it relates to incident response?
From my point of view, we do have regulatory reporting to a number of other groups already, especially for cyber incidents. So I guess one of my questions, is really back to CISA DHS is how is this going to interact with what's already being required on organizations? Is this another requirement on top of? Are they going to partner with some of these other organizations that we have to already report to work together? That's really where a lot of my questions are around this is, how is this going to help? How is it also going to help organizations? We don't need more burden on us when we already have different regulatory bodies asking for reporting, and those are not necessarily working together. Is, DHS is going to come in and say, okay, we're going to be the overarching umbrella and handle this reporting for everybody? That's my utopia. But but I'm interested to see where it's going to go. And like I said, I've got a lot of questions on it. What are they going to do with the information? How are they going to utilize it? What's the further intent for use of it? So to me, I just have a lot of questions.
Like the SEC ruling, right? I mean, if there's an incident, well, then you got to file. If you're a public entity, if you're a public traded entity, critical infrastructure or not, there's a ton. DHS's count is there's 316,000 organizations. They call them entities or businesses that are considered critical infrastructure. So that's a lot. And I see the impact there is just the volume of data. And to your point, they have to respond to SEC. Now they have to respond to this, and now they have to let the FBI know. And just, you have to hire somebody just to manage the communications, which then is that going to be efficient? So I don't know. What do you think, Chris, from your
Jeff, you're in the military, reports and more reports and more reports and more reports, right? Nobody wants more reports. But is it good? Yeah, I think it is, because, we all, from a critical infrastructure perspective, we know it's vulnerable. We know it's, there's challenges there. So if we all get in lockstep from a critical infrastructure perspective, reports lean to informing other security sectors in the critical infrastructure, which over time and a long time, I think it'll improve security overall. But, like Brian said, look, who's going to manage it? How's it managed? Hey, can I use it once it's, rolled up, or is it all going to get classified into, no man's land where we can't use it? But there is something that's cool that the NSA does. It's this under advisement program where it's a voluntary, you can solicit, threat information to the NSA, and it's a sharing type thing that they've done with some degree of success that I have a little bit of experience with in my previous jobs. But that to say that it can work if there's a reciprocal kind of use of the information. So, but where you do one, you report for one, and then over time it increases the overall security posture of the whole, I guess, is my point.
So I'm familiar with a program that you just mentioned as it relates to government entities working with NSA. Hey, I've got a problem. How can you come help me? Now you're alluding to the private sector engagement with the NSA saying, hey, 1-800-NSA, I got a breach. What do you know? Mm-hmm. How can you help?
Yeah, absolutely. All across, it's basically across all the sectors of industry can, call, 1-800-NSA, like you said, and contribute to this under advisement threat intelligence platform, unclassified.
Very cool. Very cool. I think that's something that a lot of people don't understand or don't know where that value comes from. But I think to both of your points, there's so many areas where a company, an individual can reach out and get help and get an idea and share information. They just don't know where to start. So it gets to be a bit much. There's back in 2015, DNI completed finally the creation of fusion centers around the country, one in every state. Now you'd think there'd be 50, but there's now actually 72. So I don't understand how that works out, but the original plan was one in every state. And the fusion center idea is that it's law enforcement, national security, state and local government, cybersecurity, all in one hub location, and they share information and share data. And oddly enough, that hasn't been exercised enough. It's a living, breathing entity within each state that is designed to share information. So there's some organizations that know about it and use it to some degree, but most people don't. So again, there's another avenue, another lever that people can manage, but what is the best practice? What does that look like? What's the one button to push, so to speak, to get the help you need? A little challenging for sure. So from an IR perspective, what have you seen fail? Like going through a process, was it per people? Is it process? Is it the company? Is it the culture? What have you seen fail?
That's a great question. And there's a couple of things that I'll go to on this. One of them is not having a good relationship with your C-suite, your executive suite, and in particular legal department. Having a very close working relationship with all of them is a great thing. Also, whenever you're working with them on a daily basis or however frequent, it's really ensuring that you're helping them understand what you're doing on a daily basis or what you're doing to help secure the organization. You have that story put together in their speak, their business language. So that way they understand how you're adding value to the organization, how you're helping drive down, risk and reduce risks across the organization and across everything that we're doing. So that way, the company can keep producing the widgets and taking in the money for it, and not using fear, uncertainty, and doubt, FUD, in anything you do, making sure they know that whenever you come to them and say, hey, I need your help, they know, oh, shoot, you need their help, and they're going to drop whatever they're doing. So that way, and they know this is a serious issue. You're not just running to them over every little minor thing, that you're running to them whenever you have a major issue and you need something. Make sure you have a great relationship with finance. So that way, when you're asking for that money for your IR group and for retainers, et cetera, they're aware that, again, it's not just this request that you've got coming in for more cash. It's to resolve an issue. That kind of dovetails into another piece, is having a trusted IR company on retainer. So that makes things much simpler, faster, easier, working through the processes, getting prepared with them in advance. If you can get them access into your SIM or have those procedures ready at the drop of a hat, so whenever it does, that a major incident does happen, you can pull that lever rapidly. You know who those folks are. They know who you are. You can get them access or get them whatever they need so they can start working on the incident as rapidly as possible. You're not sitting there worrying about, oh, we got to change this in the contract. We got to put an SOW here, blah, 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 blah. No, it's just ready to go, ready to roll. So that way, you can reduce that time it takes. Because as we all know, that the longer things dwell in the system, and longer things are in the system or people are in the system, the worse it gets.
Agreed. So if you don't have an IR retainer, companies should look into that, because that's going to be a failure point. If you don't have, as a CISO or a cybersecurity lead, if you don't have a good relationship with your legal or your executive team, that's going to be a problem when an incident happens, because there's no plan, there's no structure, there's no trust.
Right.
So that kind of stuff. Okay.
Yep, it's all about making sure they trust you, you trust them, you all understand each other. So that way, when they see you coming with that look that, oh, something happened, and they know that you have a solid plan, that's not going to be just this, again, FUD. It's going to be, hey, this is the issue, this is the impact of the organization, and I need X, Y, and Z from you, and you. They can pull those triggers and get you what you need rapidly. It's all about time.
Interesting. Cool. Chris,
yeah.
thoughts?
So, I'm new to this from coming out of the military. I have a couple of observations in 4 months and kind of sitting on the bench for some things that I've seen. An ad hoc process is better than no process, but still, without a codified process, that I think what Brian was leading to, it's very difficult to do these things. And you just everyone kind of points at the other guy to, here, you're going to get this done, because everywhere that I've been, the technical people, they got it, right? They can figure out what the problems are. They understand the landscape. They understand the actor. So that's not the problem. It's just the process, the communication process. When to brief the boss, when should your executive folks be hounding the IR team for information? 10 minutes into the response effort isn't the answer, right? So, so the observation of having a process, even ad hoc, is good, but maturing it to a good process, and then just the C-suite trusting that you have a team, you spent money on them, the investment is there, let them do the process, and then anticipate information on a schedule that's agreed to.
Yeah.
Great points. And
That's a good point.
also, on top of that, I was going to say the process is also key whenever, if anything goes to litigation too. So if you can show this is our process, we follow this, check, 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 and who did what, who was on first, how we preserved our evidence, how we made our decisions. That's another very, very key piece. So great point, Chris.
That brings it up too, like the chain of evidence is part of that whole process. Like you just mentioned, Chris, if you don't have that, your reporting is going to be hosed going forward for sure. No failures from the military side.
They're not all perfect, like the perfect example is templates, right? One thing that we learned while I was there is that we were creating a lot of stuff every time. When that slows down your process for information flow, because everybody needs it. The appetite is insatiable, right? At all levels. Even though my direct boss, I'm like, I'm going to have something for you in 4 hours. Well, his boss's boss's boss wants something yesterday. So creating templates was a hard lesson learned that we had.
Yeah.
Like it should be boom, put it in, fill in the words, put it out, right? And they know what they're going to get. So they know what to look for, where the spots are that they can have interest in. Because, if you're an executive officer, whatever, C-suite guy or gal, I don't need to read everything. I need to know where the information that I want is. I want to consume that. And then I want to get moving on to the next thing or advise my team where I want them to go. So I guess, information knowledge management was kind of a big failure that I could say is honestly something that I would go back to.
Yeah, interesting. Those are good points because I think, again, it's not necessarily the technical issues. The folks know it needs to be done. They're on trying to figure out how to execute on it, but it goes back to the administration, the management, the communications, the trust building you've both mentioned from a leadership perspective. And really education. I think having a playbook is important, and having the templates are very important, and having that communication plan is critical. So I agree. Wow, that's really good points. So I want to switch gears for a second. So NIST came out with a new update on a document for incident response, and in it they tied into the new NIST CSF document and the govern piece. I'm not sure if you guys, it's just been 2 weeks ago it came out, so I'm not sure if you guys have had any time to peruse that. But I'd be curious, have you found it valuable? Is it valuable, right? Because when you look back, I think there's another IR document that's 480 pages that came out last year from the government. That's a new update. Like that's, and that's great that the government can have the time to spend to do all that. But when it comes down to brass tacks, I mean, there's so many different policies, so many different compliance regimes, so many different ways of doing this. A 400-page document, a homegrown document, or even, and how do you tie that to some kind of foundational direction that you want to go as an organization? Again, I'm not sure if you guys have had time to look that over or not, but I'd be curious your thoughts if you have any there.
I love NIST for their frameworks. I really do. They put out a lot of good information. It's well thought out. They take a lot of input, which I always appreciate. 2.0, again, lots of good information. Where I saw value, and again, I've just taken a cursory look. I haven't had the chance to do the really deep dive into it, but looking at how we can build that into our practices today. And again, what parts are right, what parts are not right for us in the private sector. Teams aren't as large typically as the government, although I know I've seen some surprises there too on size of teams. So we really have to pick and choose and figure out what works best. How do we adopt the model for us? That way we can run it in our environment. It works for us. It works for our organization, works for our executives. In the event of an incident, can we pull those levers? Do we have the right folks? Do the people know what their roles are? And that's where I do really like what NIST does is they put some really clear definitions in there. So a lot of times we can just borrow that information. I would rather reuse instead of having to reinvent the wheel. And if I can borrow a lot of what they're doing, it's very clear, easy for everyone at every level to really understand. Whenever you start wrapping that in and having those discussions as to, okay, in an incident, crisis communications, Corp Comm group, this is what we're talking about. This is what we need. This is how we can work together. Now, how can we help you as you're building out your processes in the event we have to do this? So like I said, to me, I've always valued NIST's documentation.
How about you, Chris? Have you had time to take a look at it?
Reading NIST documents for 4 months, Jeff. I NIST is always a thing until you really got to get intimate with NIST. And I feel like I've been there. So the thing that I appreciate is the consistency. And I think, Brian, you alluded to this, the process, the life cycle isn't changing. They're growing and maturing terms, roles, responsibilities, and things like that, which I'm 100% okay with. But the foundational process is remaining the same. They're just adding things to make it more encompassing, I guess is the word.
I think the one thing that I found interesting in the draft that they've released it just a couple of weeks ago, April 3rd or 4th, is when you look at the document, it goes into the NIST CSF as standards, their standards, but then incident response, recommendations, and considerations just for IR. And then it prioritizes those situations. So it kind of gives you almost a bit of a playbook, low, medium, high issues. So when you go through the document, you're actually able to see how your concerns are reflected in the NIST documentation, which again, I mean, I think it's a 40-some page document. So it's smaller than the 400-page document, but it really allows, I think it helps people. And again, this is just a draft form. The government's seeking feedback for this. It really helps teams identify, again, the high, medium, low, and then polishing their IR plan to some of the recommendations you guys have made today for sure. And then really trying to identify what that looks like from a operationalization perspective. So
yeah, it really does help you
cool.
see the gaps in your program, what you've got. It's just that being able to have that third party view and think, oh shoot, yeah, we didn't think about this. How do we build this in? And how do we go forward with that other piece, et cetera, et cetera.
So final question for both of you guys. Somebody comes to you and says, what do I do? How do I build a plan? I'm a small company. I'm a one-man show. What do I do? Where do I start? What would your answers be?
That is a amazing question, especially if it's a one-person show or a very, very small team. First thing I would recommend actually is reaching out and getting some third-party help, getting some assistance from a third party. Being inside an organization, I've been in organizations where we've had major cyber incidents about every 2 years, some not so frequent. So you're not as practiced. You're reading all this material and you can start framing it out. But reaching out and getting some third-party help, I think, is one of the key pieces, because incident responders, groups they're living and breathing this every single day. They can really help you understand, with the understanding of your business, making sure you understand your business is a key point. You can relay that with them, and they can then help you overlay. So I've helped some organizations do this in the past, some nonprofits and others, and there's components which weren't really necessary, but other pieces were hyper focused, and that was elevated more than some of the larger organizations I've been in. So like I said, it's kind of trying to find that balance and reaching out, not being afraid to say, hey, I need help, because again, we're all dealing with this every day. We all know what we know, and it's that collective diverse group thought which really helps. There's lots of different collaboratives out there which are willing to help and provide information. And then again, like I said, a lot of the IR companies, reaching out with them, I've worked with a couple of them that we're happy to kind of go through some of those ideas at little to no cost, just so we can get a plan started and going forward.
Agreed. Chris?
Because you're asking me this because we're doing this right now, right? Like, how do we do this? It's a great question because it's difficult. Instant response, where do you start?
If somebody was to come to you and say,
well, first thing you got to do is prepare, right? You got to kind of take a look at the risk tolerance for the organization. What's the mission? What are we doing? What are the drivers? What are your challenges? All of those things. And then start building a policy around kind of what the goal is. And then you develop a plan on how you would do it, and then support that plan with what the team looks like, in my opinion. Incident response is stressful. You got to have the right mix of people from a technical aspect, from a mentality perspective, because when something hits the fan, in my mind, the incident response crew that comes in is like your special operations folks. You're going to find, fix, and eliminate any problems that you may have. So that in and of itself, the preparation phase for building the team, having the policy, having the plan, build the team. And then when you get into the operation phase, rehearsals, tabletop drills, while you're in those areas of downtime, Brian, like you said, it could be feast or famine, right? But in those times of downtime, those are the times when you're doing your rehearsals and updating and developing those documents, because they're all living documents, all change with the threat landscape. And then the more you rehearse and practice, the better you are prepared for when it does happen, and you can respond in kind. But that's kind of in 2 minutes. That's how I would do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got to start somewhere. Cool. Well, I appreciate the time, guys. I know we're a little over. We've got to shoot for about 30 minutes here, so I appreciate the engagement. Yeah. Any other final thoughts?
Yeah, I got to catch you one. There's two zones, right? You got the if zone and the when zone. If you're in the if zone, you're constantly questioning yourself. Are we prepared? Have we done what we can to prepare? What do we do if it happens? Or you can be in the when zone. We are prepared. Our team is functional, and we can respond when it does happen. So that's kind of all the stuff that I'm reading, it just kept popping into my mind. But that, like, if you live there, if you're in the win zone, when it does happen, you're ready to respond. And if you're in the if zone, you might want to call in that third party retainer if it does happen. So
yeah, it's really around always being prepared, always being ready, know what you're going to do, have that plan available, dusting it off every now and again, looking at it, in a timely fashion, making sure that everyone on your team's aware, everyone on all your partner teams are aware, your infrastructure group, again, legal, corp comm, you name it. Everyone is aware of what's going to happen in an incident, if it does happen, or when it does happen, I should really say. It's just all whenever you find it. So it's really just making sure you're always prepared. Everybody's always prepared. And typically these things happen on holidays and weekends. At least that's what I've always seen for over my career. So taking a little bit of time and just reviewing, something I like to do towards the end of the week is block out a chunk of time, review what happened that week, be prepared, understand, if there's vulnerabilities that are out that aren't patched, that you're aware of, just understanding what that threat landscape looks like for your organization. So that way, as you go into the weekend, if you get that call, you've kind of got some of these things front of mind and you can be more prepared. Like I said, just be ready at all times. It's really that always be prepared.
Good points. Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate the time. For our listeners, we appreciate you guys listening. This is good stuff. This is basic operational things from a couple of guys who've been there, done that for sure. Appreciate the time again, and thanks for joining us on this week's State of Security podcast.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you. Appreciate it.